Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Usher, and this is the World of Higher Education podcast. See, it's hard to believe sometimes, but after 110 or so episodes of this show, there's still a few countries we haven't been to. One of them is today's destination of Bulgaria. It's not a place which is often top of mind as far as higher education goes, but maybe it should be. Among European countries, Bulgaria has been one of the leaders in dealing with the question of sharply declining youth populations. In recent months, it's had an interesting showdown with students over tuition fees, and, unrelatedly, a major youth backed movement succeeded in forcing an elected government to resign. And to round it all off, the country has one of the world's most interesting systems of national rankings, one which takes a balanced use of student surveys and administrative data, the latter of which includes, uniquely, data taken directly from the national tax system that follows graduates for up to 7 years. Today, my guest is Georgi Stoytchev. He's the executive director of the Open Society Institute in Bulgaria, an organization which has a major presence in Bulgarian higher education, including, among other things, organizing that very intriguing set of rankings. He and I range over a wide number of issues in this discussion, including the structure of Bulgarian higher education, the politics of population decline, and of course, how universities in Bulgaria came, to some extent at least, to love rankings. All in all, an excellent conversation about an often unjustly overlooked country. And so without further ado, here's Georgi. Georgi, welcome. We've never had a Bulgarian guest on our show. And when we come to a country for the first time, we like to sort of set the stage and ask people about the system of higher education in that country. So, tell us about higher education in Bulgaria. Is it just universities, or are there other institutions like polytechnics or Fachhochschule? Is it a particularly research focused or teaching focused system? Are there lots of specialized universities? What does a newcomer need to know about higher education in Bulgaria?
Well, look, Bulgaria is a small country with a population of 6.5 million people, and we have 51 higher education institutions, all kinds of them, universities, specialized higher education schools, colleges, and all of them are recognized, and all of them are degree awarding institutions established with the decision of the parliament. In terms of research, we have 12 research universities recognized by the state, and all these universities have to meet certain criteria in order to be recognized. And once you're recognized as a research university, you receive additional funding from the state for your research activities. One thing that is specific for Bulgaria in terms of research is that the biggest research hub in the country is the Bulgarian Academy of Science, which is not a university, which is not a higher education institution, which to a certain extent explains the early performance of Bulgarian institutions in global rankings, because almost half of all research papers produced in Bulgaria are produced outside of the higher education institutions.
And what about specialized universities? I think you have sort of police universities and things like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
they exist. We have technical universities, medical universities, we have police academy, we have agricultural universities, and also we have these specialized higher education schools, which provide a degree called professional bachelor in, which is a shorter degree than the typical bachelor. In Bulgaria, you have to study 4 years to get a bachelor's degree, while professional bachelor, you have to study only 3 years, and it's directly linked to the labor market needs.
Interesting. Okay. So, what's the evolution been of Bulgarian higher education since the end of the socialist period 35 years ago? I mean, obviously, you've retained a big Academy of Sciences, right? So you're a little different from some neighboring countries that way. Did Bulgaria get a big private higher education influx after 1989, the way Poland did? What were the main strategies for building up the system again after the economic crises of the early 1990s?
What happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall was liberalization of the system on the one hand and expansion of the system on the other hand. And system expanded in two ways. On the one hand, private universities were established, and on the other hand, the existing state universities expanded their portfolios in terms of the number of fields they provide education in. So as a result, the whole system expanded, and today we have a system with a total capacity to enroll 400,000 students, while the actual number of students is under 200,000. So it's too big considering the demographics in Bulgaria. Only 13 out of 51 universities in the countries are private, and only around 11% of the students are enrolled in private institutions. So private sector do exist in Bulgaria's higher education, but it's smaller than, I guess, in Poland.
Right. Okay. So one of the things one of the places where Bulgaria has become a little bit famous in the last couple of decades is its system of university rankings, which is quite unique. It's not really a commercial undertaking the way you see in the U.S. or the global rankings, because there's significant government involvement. And uniquely, it actually uses graduate tax data to provide evidence of student outcomes. How did this ranking system come about, and what was the role of your organization, the Open Society Institute, in creating and maintaining it?
Well, there was a tender 15 years ago, and the Ministry of Education commissioned the system. So we offered our services as part of a larger consortium and developed the concept of the system. And then we developed the system. The ministry liked it. The university started to trust it. So the system has been existing for 15 years now. It's quite trusted. It's widely used, not only by prospective students, but also by the institutions. The system is integrated in the funding formula for the state universities. So in Bulgaria, we have a system of performance-based state funding for the state-owned universities. If you perform better in the ranking system, you'll get more money per student, and your quota for state subsidized places will be bigger. So the system is integrated very well in the policy making in Bulgaria. And it's not only rankings, it's a kind of an information hub for the higher education in Bulgaria, providing relevant information beyond the rankings.
That's fascinating, right? I mean, there's nowhere else in the world where a set of rankings are used both as a consumer choice tool and as a policy instrument, as you say, if it's integrated into the performance-based funding system. And that does require a fair bit of trust, right? Like, you have to have policy actors who think this is useful. And I'm really interested to hear you say that the universities themselves trust it. Maybe I heard some hesitation in your voice, maybe not 100%, but how did you get the universities to trust it? Because generally speaking, they're the most anti-ranking typically in most countries.
Well, in the predefined rankings, we avoid using surveys. We use third-party data,
Okay.
and we use administrative data. So it's so-called objective indicators. It's quite transparent about the use methodology, and it could not be influenced by subjective factors. So universities started to trust it. This trust was not present at the beginning, but gradually they showed that the system is sort of fair. And also we try to consult the methodology with the universities a lot. So most of the universities are involved in the development of the methodology. So they have a certain level of ownership of the methodology itself.
But you do use surveys. It's just that you only use the surveys in what do you call it? So the multidimensional rankings, the choose your own rankings for students to
Indeed, we do surveys. We do surveys among students, among employers, and among academic staff. And with exception of the indicators related to prestige, others are not included in the predefined rankings.
So, Georgi, I want to bring us up to the present date here. There were some really interesting things that were happening in Bulgarian higher education last year. The first thing was a fracas about tuition fees. And maybe before I ask you about those events, can you explain something about tuition and affordability in Bulgaria? Are fees very expensive? Do they play a significant part in university financing? And I guess, is there a set of student loans and grants to help students offset fees?
Well, look, in Bulgaria, part of the students are enrolled within the state-funded quota. And these students pay a small fee in couple of hundred euros per year. For example, my daughter studies English philology, and she pays less than 200 euros per year as an additional fee. Above the quota, the universities could admit and enroll students that are not part of the quota. So in order to avoid cross-subsidizing, the law requires the fees paid by these students enrolled above the state quota, outside the state quota, their fees should be equal or should be linked to the money the state pay per student within the state-funded quota.
Okay. Just before you go any further, how many of the 200,000 students are under the quota? Like, how many pay that 200 euros and how many pay more than
And the
that?
majority of students are part of the state-funded. So
Got
the
it.
majority of students, so a very small fraction of students, less than 10% of students are enrolled above the quota.
Okay. And so, and do they benefit from any student loans or grants to help them with that?
Yes, student loan schemes are available, but they're not widely used.
Right. Okay. So what happened last September? As you said, it was an issue about their fees are linked to the amount of money that government pays. Government, as I understand it, is spending significantly more per student, maybe because the number of students are going down. And so fees suddenly jumped quite quickly. Is that right?
Exactly. This is what happened. The government increased the funding for state universities, and they increased the funding they provide per student. And because of the linkage between the government funding and the fees that should be paid by, let's say, private students, the fees skyrocketed for the private student. So what happened was that the parliament adjusted the law, and they dealt with the situation. But at some point there was quite a noise about it. And it was an unintended consequence of actually increasing the state funding for the state universities.
That's an interesting, I don't think I've ever heard of a tuition crisis caused by increasing state funding. So this also may be a first in Bulgaria. Let me bring you something a little closer here. So last December, the national government had to resign because of mass demonstrations in Sofia. And as I understand it, students were quite important in the organization of those protests. What happened? Like, and how much were students actually involved in the planning? Was this a situation like Serbia where it was mostly student planned, or were students attracted to a movement that was started by someone else?
Look, like Serbia, these were anti-corruption protests against state capture. And like Serbia, students and people from Gen Z played an important role. They probably were the most visible and most attractive part of the protests. But these were not students-led protests. These protests were led and organized by the opposition. And as a result, the government, as you mentioned, resigned. So we're going to have snap elections in Bulgaria in 2 months. Actually, the 8th snap general elections in the country in the last 5 years. So we are setting a record in this respect.
And why did the protests attract young people particularly? I mean, you said it was an anti-corruption movement. I mean, how does that affect young people specifically? What's the driver there?
Look, it's a $1 million question. And there are studies now to figure it out. But basically, since the protests were organized mostly through social media, TikTok, Instagram, they naturally involved a lot of young people, Gen Z, and some of the faces of the protests were young people. So I think this also played an important role.
And was it actually Gen Z or was it students? Because this is an interesting thing that we're seeing around the world now in Nepal and Morocco and in a lot of places where we talk about Gen Z protests rather than student protests. I mean, were the student unions involved? Like, was that part of it, the organized student body?
No, student unions directly were not involved. It was painted rather as Gen Z protests, not so much as student protests, but
Yeah.
there were students' organizations actively involved in and visible during the protests.
Got it. So where do you think Bulgarian higher education is heading right now? I mean, is it on an upswing? As you said, there's more government money coming in. So maybe is it, do things look good for the near future, or is it on a downswing? I mean, I infer from something you said that you've got a bit of a demographic issue that you're struggling against. I mean, if we come back and do this interview again in 2036, what do you think will have changed in Bulgarian higher education?
But there will be fewer institutions, higher share of foreign students, higher share of first generation students,
Mhm.
maybe improved quality. But the key word in the next 10 years will be consolidation because we expect a significant drop in the number of Bulgarian students due to demographics. So the birth rates are not good in Bulgaria. Bulgaria, by the way, is among the countries with the fastest shrinking population. 35 years ago, there were close to 9 million people living in Bulgaria. Currently, there are 6.5 million,
Right.
and the picture is not improving.
And is there a process for consolidation? I'm just thinking, so a country that's in a similar situation would be South Korea, and they've just passed a law to make it easier to close universities, both public and private. Has the debate started in Bulgaria about how to do that?
Yeah, there is a number of policies in place, including a policy called Map of Higher Education, in which my institution is also involved, which is trying to regulate the opening of new structures within the higher education. So practically in Bulgaria, if you want to open a new university or new unit, or you want to expand the number of fields in which your university provides training, you have to meet certain criteria and you have to prove that there is demand for the establishment of this new structure. And basically, nowadays, it's quite difficult to open any new structure in Bulgaria because of this policy, which aim is to consolidate the system, which is quite fragmented at the moment.
Georgie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
It just remains for me to thank our excellent producers, Tiffany McLennan and Sam Pufek, and you, our readers and listeners, for joining in. If you have any questions or comments about today's episode or suggestions for future ones, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us at podcast@higheredstrategy.com. Join us next week when our guest will be Saeed Golkar. He's a professor of political science at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, and will be joining us to talk about the role of students in recent protests in Iran. Bye for now.